Not too long ago, I was talking to someone that hasn't been in VR as long as I have. And they were actually pretty shocked and interested to know that when the original Oculus Rift came out, it didn't even have motion controllers with it. It sold at $600 with an Xbox One controller. They thought that was pretty crazy, but I guess I got kind of so used to remembering that I didn't realize that some new people might not know some cool little historical tidbits about the first years of consumer VR. Ever since that discussion, I've been sort of thinking about a lot of things that maybe people don't realize or understand about consumer VR, even if they are, well, been in it for a couple of years. And one really kind of piqued my interest that I want to talk about. VR locomotion. I mean, we've been kind of talking about it more recently thanks to this thing, the little Deca move. But really, it's kind of very important to VR, yet we haven't really gotten that far into figuring it out. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about the history and where we are now. It's going to be probably a long video because I love talking about this kind of stuff. So go ahead and grab a drink, grab a snack, and, well, watch me wear this stupid hat. So before we can talk about locomotion, we have to kind of talk about, well, the hardware that came out when consumer VR really first started kicking. So let's go back to 2016, early 2016 to be exact. Consumer VR is pretty much dominated by two people. They both released headsets. Facebook, or Oculus, which they were actually more known as Oculus back then, Facebook didn't put their branding on anything, they just were about to release the Oculus Rift Consumer version 1. And as I said in the intro, it didn't have Oculus touch controllers yet. They were still working on those. So it came with an Xbox One controller. Then on the other end, there was Valve partnering with HTC to release the HTC Vive. Most of it was all hardware designed heavily with Valve, but HTC and their experience with mobile phones and manufacturing helped Valve out bring it to market at $800 for a full kit. VR hardware at the time was very expensive, $600 or $800, and $200 later to add Oculus Touch to the CV1. It pretty much was the same price. And they had a lot of same values of, well, what software can work with these headsets? This was in the literal wild west of, well, game design or any VR design. And people kind of were thinking about, okay, how do we make people that are new to VR, because everyone that is buying these headsets will be new to VR pretty much. How do we make them enjoy content without making them sick? And the biggest issue with that was, well, joystick locomotion back then was a tested thing, and everyone basically decided this is not going to work for VR at all. It's impossible. People get too sick when they are constantly artificially locomoting, and it's just impossible right now. So pretty much both companies kind of just abandoned the idea of artificial locomotion and completely went for the idea that either teleportation or wave shooting or even just sitting you in a little area and having things happen around you, like Job Simulator, is probably all VR is going to do for the near future. Of course, Valve thought the idea to kind of remedy this was to have room scale VR, which you would have players be able to teleport to the other side of the room, and then any other locomotion they can do in real life by walking with their real actual body in a large room area. The problem with that is, well, not everyone has that much room to actually walk around, especially if you live in an apartment or something in the downtown of a city. So obviously at room scale, it's gotten a little more popular now thanks to inside-out tracking. But back then, it was just inaccessible and it was impossible to really design games around the idea of everyone having large spaces to walk around. So for literally a couple of years, teleport locomotion was the main thing that VR titles had. I even remember when Onward came out, which was actually one of the first games that was even daring to try to do joystick locomotion. A lot of developers were pretty vocal on Twitter saying, this is very dangerous, very bad practices, no one's going to be able to do this. But then it started catching on more and more, and, well, the developers started kind of standing back a little bit and being like, well, it can only work for Onward. Onward is a very slow-moving game, and yada, yada, yada. But as time goes on, and more people started getting joystick controllers, the Oculus Touch, for example, had a joystick, and previously the Xbox One, which only has joysticks, people's expectations of locomotion in VR started to move toward artificial locomotion, joystick movement. It got to the point where a game called Budget Cuts, which was actually a very hyped up title for years, but didn't come really out for a couple years after consumer VR came out. That game was a teleport only game because it was just in production and designed for so long. But it released with teleport only locomotion, and so many people actually didn't like the game because their standards of locomotion had already changed by then. A teleport only game at that time when it released was already to the point where people were like, this is not good. And then Budget Cuts 2 came out a year or two later, and you'll notice they quickly combined the two locomotions together because that was just the main complaint of the first game. And as time went on, headsets started getting better. They started having higher refresh rates as a standard, which higher refresh rates actually combat motion sickness a lot better than you would think. The issue with joystick locomotion and really any locomotion of VR is your inner ear and all these other things, your brain cannot match with the real life body. So it feels you're kind of just, your brain thinks that you're kind of panicking in a way or having a mental breakdown. At least it's worse for some people and not so bad as others, but it varies. But today we finally have most titles actually support artificial locomotion. In fact, it's gotten to the point where something called smooth turning, which is literally you are able to move your head, or at least your internal player, left or right smoothly without snap turning. That was another thing that people thought back then was never going to happen because it would just make people way too disoriented and sick. But now we're at the point where everyone wants smooth turning in their games. I'm not sure if that's more of a fact that, well, it's better to watch content with smooth turning, or people just like the idea of smooth turning in VR. It's definitely more, in my opinion, difficult to get used to smooth turning than artificial locomotion, but that's a whole other topic. So yeah, now we're in an age of artificial locomotion. This is the now. Artificial locomotion is huge. Everything has joysticks. The HTC Vive came out with a controller that only had touchpads, no joysticks. But the Valve Index controllers remedied that very quickly by adding joysticks, which is even more proof that the change of locomotion among consumers was, well, big enough to make a change in hardware. And there hasn't been that much, well, change in ideas since we've switched to artificial locomotion. It hasn't changed the fact that people that are new to VR will probably get sick with artificial locomotion, but it's at the point where people tell them to get VR legs or used to it. Because that's really the only way you can get used to a lot of the content right now. Games will also have the choice to just still supports teleport, but people don't understand that teleport is actually there as a more accessibility thing, and most people actually just skip using teleport altogether. I watched many people playing through Half-Life Alyx when it first came out, and they were new to VR, and they just assumed that teleport was just a weird option that they didn't want to play. And they were surprised when they got sick because they were new to VR and were using the artificial locomotion. So first of all, developers need to kind of communicate a little bit better that teleport locomotion is better if you want to stay in VR longer hours when you're new. But again, another topic. But not much has changed. That's the point. Not much has changed in the locomotion sector. The Deca Move made some pretty big strides though, and making locomotion kind of come to the forefront for VR. Because before, people were only using artificial locomotion either directed by your head or your hand, wherever it was pointing. But this actually allowed you to have your hip be a natural point of reference for where artificial locomotion should have you walk toward. And even though it's a small thing, it's actually a lot more healthier for a brain to imagine your hip going forward than your head and your arm or whatever heading that direction instead. Basically, the more natural that movement is for maybe a real life body, your brain's going to catch up a bit faster. But other than that, there hasn't really been much changes in what ideas could make locomotion even better. Now, I know what people are going to say. People are going to bring up two probably ideas or products that have come out in the years. One is Omni Treadmills. Well, let's talk about Omni Treadmills for just a bit. What do Omni Treadmills really do? Well, you strap into this thing, you wear special shoes, and you are just held into this circular thing, and you walk. But what is that walking really translating into? It's instead of your thumb pressing a joystick, it's your body As someone who's tried some of these popular treadmill products, I can tell you from firsthand experience, these treadmills are not that revolutionary, and honestly not that much more immersive than using a joystick. If anything, it might make you even less immersed because of the fact that you're strapped into these things. You kind of feel like you're constantly being held down and slipping on ice because, well, that's how they work. Is they usually have special shoes, make slippery thing on the ground, and bam, joystick locomotion. We also had another product recently called Cyber Shoes, which you would buy the Cyber Shoes, and it worked very similar actually to Omni Treadmills. You would sit in a chair and have the cyber carpet. Yeah, they call the carpet that comes with it, they call the cyber carpet. That's my favorite part about the product. But yeah, it's very similar situation. You sit down and you move. But maybe there's some people that don't really like playing sitting down in VR, so that kind of ruins that idea too. And again, all it does is just kind of translate your walking around data to pressing up on a joystick. So locomotion in VR is still kind of a problem that is almost, I would say, difficult and impossible to solve. I think for the next few years, we're still just going to be telling people new to VR that you just got to get used to artificial locomotion. There's not much out there that's going to change that. There are people I still know that despite the increases in refresh rate and hardware and having all these products and teleport, they still get nauseous in VR. And locomotion is a big reason due to that. However, I'm more curious what maybe you guys think or what the future may bring for, well, VR locomotion. Here's what personally I think the future of VR locomotion will be. So on my channel, I very briefly discussed BCIs or brain-computer interfaces. And while I think we're years off from it actually being inside a actual consumer VR product, I think the idea of having your brain scanned to sort of think about walking a certain direction or walking a certain way and being trained by the AI network to actually work with the BCI will actually be the biggest gain we'll have for VR locomotion for a while. I personally think that the active thought you'll have to do to make something like this happen will be very beneficial in making your brain catch up what's happening in your VR headset. And not only that, I imagine you don't even need like something really invasive as plugging a brain chip into your brain to even access something like that. So while I say BCI, I don't even think it would be an actual implant or anything like that. Of course, we're so far away from that, you know, it's just me being hopeful and crazy. I'm crazy. So what do you think about locomotion right now? Maybe you're someone that actually still does get sick in VR, but you just struggle through it anyway because you enjoy the experience. Or maybe you just think VR is still a daunting task, so you just don't even pick up your VR headset anymore due to it. Or maybe you play exclusively on teleport still for every game that supports it. What do you do? What do you do, and what do you think the industry will go toward in the future? Because I think it's one of the most important tasks that we all need to figure out how to solve pretty soon. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this historical both video. Is this historical? I think it's historical. Maybe not if you've been around for 5 years or more. Maybe this is all new, nothing new to you, but some people, I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and have a great day.